And the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio's 12th District for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Gandler, I don't have a question for you, but it's funny. Mr. Allen and I were just talking food, but I no disrespect, sir, but I live in the hills of southeastern Ohio, and I actually got an email from my Charter Spectrum on Saturday that says, hey, get a hold of Fubo and do a free trial. So thank you for Spectrum is out there helping you. So, and he just tried to get on.
I did the same thing.
All right, Mr. Spellmeyer, thank you for being here too. And several live TV streaming services known as VMVPDs have begun offering skinny bundles that provide their customers with a small bundle of live TV options, offering more consumer choice. Obviously, we would like everyone to be able to compete in this marketplace, but in this respect, and as Mr. Gandler mentioned in his testimony, these new services can offer more choices to consumers, and the data shows that consumers are taking advantage of this flexibility. Can you explain why some traditional TV providers do not offer this service to their consumers, and what can be done to provide more consumer choice and promote competition in the industry?
Yeah, as I've discussed at several points in this hearing, that really goes to that issue of consumer choice, and I'll call it a la carte or skinny bundles or small packages. My members have pushed very hard against the programmers to try to get that over a period of time of a decade, and the content providers won't let us do it. I've talked about market power. My guys are small, they're rural, they serve a county or two. The programmers just look at them and say, no, not going to let you do that. Now, YouTube TV has had some success in breaking that model, in part because they're Google. And Google's got a lot more market power than Boycom Cable does in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Or the numerous providers that we have as members in Ohio. We don't have the power to break it. And it is good for consumers, and we've talked about that extensively. We should try to do it.
Thank you. Mr. Leggett, thank you for being here. And the Columbus media market, which serves a large portion of my congressional district that I represent, has 5 local broadcasters that are broadcasting their content on HD channels and ATSC 3.0, also known as Next Gen TV. In your testimony, you touch on Next Gen TV and the new opportunities and benefits that it provides for both TV stations and consumers. Can you discuss the viewer benefits and give an update on where mitigation to Next Gen TV stands?
Absolutely, Congressman. Thank you for the question. We're tremendously proud of this rollout that's going on across the country of next generation television. This is an upgraded over-the-air standard that will allow viewers to access for free a 4K picture, immersive audio, more interactive programming, hyper-localized weather and news. Make no mistake, as we're talking about the future of sports rights, as we're talking about the service we provide to our communities, our ability to provide that type of viewer experience is table stakes to ensuring that we can maintain our audience versus the Apple TVs and the Amazons of the world. Right now, we are deployed in 70 markets. 65% of the country can access some sort of next-gen television, but we are in the midst of this transition. It's tough because as opposed to an AT&T or Verizon who can just upgrade to a 5G, we need the entire industry rowing in the same direction. We need the consumer electronics industry on board. We need the consumer groups on board. So we are very supportive of the FCC's recent launch in partnership with the NAB of a Future of Television initiative that is enabling that transition and really, I think, sets a framework to get this transition from where it is today to completion nationwide so that every consumer can access these benefits.
Okay, thank you very much. My last question, excuse me, is for Mr. Gandler again. Well, not again, but the 2014 FCC Notice of Proposed Rulemaking regarding the VMVPDs has been frequently discussed leading up to this hearing. You mentioned in your testimony that if these rules were adopted, the cost of Fubo TV and similar services would increase, ultimately being passed on to the consumer. I've heard similar concerns from across the industry. Could you tell me why being regulated as an MVPD would increase costs and how significant that would increase would be for your business and consumers? And I'm going to stop you because I'm out of time, but if you could submit that answer, that would be great. We'll get that to you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Chairman.
much. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I thank our ranking member, Matsui, for holding this hearing, as well as our panel of esteemed witnesses for joining us today to discuss and examine the ever-changing industry. Television was once an industry comprised of just a few local broadcast networks delivering a limited number of linear television channels to local consumers over the air at no cost, and is morphed into the multi-billion-dollar video marketplace of today, comprised of broadcast networks, cable, satellite providers, and online video distributors, offering both linear and nonlinear programming through a variety of platforms beyond a traditional television set. Unfortunately, too many of these platforms are owned or controlled by a handful of multinational corporations with complex, often competing financial interests driving corporate decision-making with the ability to impact millions of consumers. While the corporate interests, technological advances, and policy choices that led to the current state of affairs have undoubtedly unleashed unprecedented consumer choice for video content consumption, there remains much work to be done by both policymakers and the private sector to ensure the long-term viability of the sector. And while competition and consumer choice will rightly be a major topic of conversation today, I want to focus on the importance of diverse and independent voices within the video marketplace and media ecosystem more broadly. Diversity in media goes beyond mere representation. It's about including voices from different racial, ethnic, gender, socioeconomic, and cultural backgrounds, and reflecting the tapestry of experiences and perspectives found across our nation. Moreover, a diverse media landscape can create economic opportunity for the historically marginalized communities and is essential for a healthy democracy by ensuring citizens can make informed decisions on critical issues. Given our nation's unfortunate history of discrimination and withholding of opportunities of marginalized communities, we must take care to not entrench the inequities of today when crafting policies that spur the innovations of tomorrow. We all must continue to support policies that encourage diversity in media, and I look forward to introducing legislation in the coming weeks to do just that. My first question is directed to Mr. Leggett. Thank you for joining us today. I understand the difficult position broadcasters are forced into as tech firms and larger conglomerates use streaming services as loss leaders to compete for market share. The important role broadcasters play as trusted sources for local news on a daily basis and in providing communities like mine with a crucial lifeline during times of emergency cannot be overstated, and I thank you. So, Mr. Leggett, how might the suggested FCC reforms you mentioned in your prepared testimony impact diversity in media in terms of both content and ownership? And what would you say are the biggest obstacles to increasing diversity across the media landscape?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Diversity in media is top of mind for all of us at the NAB and across the industry. I mean, we are advocating for reinstatement of the FCC's tax certificate program to incentivize sales to diverse broadcast owners. We run a broadcast leadership training program out of our foundation that ensures that the leadership in our industry better reflects the diversity of the communities that we serve. And we are hyper-focused on producing toolkits for our journalists across the country to ensure that the reporting on racially sensitive issues matches the needs of the community. But none of this will impact what is on the screen, what is reaching living rooms across the country, if the broadcast industry isn't one that would-be investors, including diverse investors, are willing to come into. And so we need to ensure that we can gain the scale to compete with the YouTubes and the Facebooks of the world. Local broadcasters are subject to ownership restrictions that no one else in the media landscape is subject to. That chills investment. There's uncertainty as to how broadcast transactions will be reviewed at the FCC, what the timeline will look like, whether they will receive an up or down vote. That chills potential investment. So all of these are areas of focus for this committee to ensure greater diversity in broadcasting.
Very well. I have 4 seconds, so if you gentlemen would submit to me some of your thoughts in writing, that would be extremely helpful. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for being here today. And really, I don't know that I have a question. I just want to go over some of the notes that I have, and you tell me if I'm wrong, okay? And yes, I do have Spectrum, and I couldn't watch the ball games. And I don't know how he got FUBU for a month, and mine said a week. You better. Mine said a week. Okay, Rick. Okay. You better check your cable bill.
I haven't gotten a notice. That was 7 days ago.
Well, I didn't sign up. I'm just saying. I went to my son's and watched YouTube TV. Anyway.
I noticed yet, by the way. On payment.
Okay. Well, let me see if I've got all this right so we can regulate or deregulate, okay? We've got decades-old regulations, and it stifles traditional TV providers and streaming platforms, it looks like, are able to flourish in a deregulated market. So, Mr. Spellmeyer, you said that retransmission fees are basically under a gag order, and I call it that because we don't know what they're charging. And Mr. Leggett, you said we need to reinvest in local programming, basically, and you all said we need an a la carte system and a service from content providers who won't allow us to have that right now, which I would love to have that. You all said that sports rights cost a whole lot of money and is putting pressure on these program providers due to real-time viewing and advertising. And Mr. Leggett, you said FCC needs to examine retransmission consent as the number of customers go to streaming. We need antitrust and oversight. And Mr. Swantes, I do have a subscription to Consumer Reports too, just FYI. You don't support applying the Cable Act to streaming, and you would prefer less regulations. So I guess the bottom line is we need price transparency and more freedom of choice. Am I correct? Anybody can answer. You all four need to answer.
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Well,
Yeah, you were paying careful attention.
I'm a pharmacist. I have to have the details correct or I could kill somebody. So just like that month versus a week. So, I mean, look, I look at, okay. I'll look at what we do with, legit, what you do. I mean, it's a national security issue when it comes to like the fires in Maui. We have to have the AM radio. We have to have an infrastructure that will support all that. I live in a rural area where broadband is imperative to getting streaming. And, you know, I look at what they're wanting to do with the vehicles now, and you only have streaming. The people I serve, they drive gasoline cars, and they listen to AM radio. So we have to have that as an option and choices. And, you know, competition makes everything better, and it makes everybody better. So did I get anything wrong? I hope your answer is no.
No.
Okay, good. I'll continue my subscription with Consumer Reports.
And thank you for being a subscriber to Consumer Reports. No, the issue on the cable bundle, and maybe I can answer since I'm not a cable company and I'm not a content provider. For many, many years, the cable bundle, and let's go back to the 90s or even 20 years ago, all of those large, I mean, first of all those channels that we know,
Yeah.
there aren't many independent channels out there. So Disney owns, I don't know off the top of my head, 10, 20 channels.
Why couldn't I get Nat Geo on there? They wouldn't allow that back on the network.
Yeah, because that was part of the deal that they got with Charter. So it's sort of like, what do we like, and what are we willing to sacrifice? And so that we'd have to ask the CEO of Charter. But a lot of the big must-have programming, whether it's the local channels and I mean, the local channels are gold for local broadcasting and live sports. It is expensive to cut deals with the major sports leagues, and that is driving a lot of costs for retrans and all across the industry. But all of those big fees paid to ESPN subsidize Nat Geo and these smaller channels. And the fear, and I'm not smart enough to figure it out, but if you just had them a la carte, do those channels survive? Because let's just say 50 million people want ESPN, but 500,000 want Nat Geo Wild. Like they're really, really fun one.
That's the one I
But that
want.
can't sustain it if you tell Nat Geo Wild, you tell Nat Geo, like, well, you can only survive on what you get from subscribers. And they'll be like, maybe it was the thing that no one wanted to talk about, the cross-subsidization.
Okay, I'm out of time now. Well, I'll talk to you guys later offline. I yield back, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
The gentlelady's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Hampshire for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the committee for this important hearing. This discussion is timely, as many households in my district in northern New Hampshire are currently experiencing the consequences of a breakdown in the TV marketplace. Over this past week, I've heard directly from constituents who can no longer access Channel 9 News due to a blackout of the local broadcasting station, WMUR, on their cable TV provider. Granite City's rely on WMUR to get their daily weather and traffic updates, emergency alerts, and to stay up to date on what's happening in their community and across this country. Let me be clear, this blackout is the result of a business contract dispute, but it's the consumer who gets caught in the middle and pays the price. Mr. Schwantes, you stated that blackouts have been on the rise in recent years. Would you consider these blackouts a sign that the current structure of the video marketplace is no longer serving these customers?
Certainly, it's one of the things that we point out as being very disturbing and anti-consumer, and I would say one of the worst things in the current marketplace that we need to address. There are some novel ideas out there, and again, there's no silver bullet here, but even if you had sort of a 60-day cooling off mediation period for the thorniest disputes, so you do not have the channels, because it's tough. It cuts both ways. I mean, think about Disney. Were they really willing to let $2.2 billion sit on the table? How long can they sustain that when they're trying to make Disney Plus profitable? So both sides have a lot to gain. Both sides have a lot to lose. For us at Consumer Reports, it's easy. Consumers end up getting the short end of the stick in either scenario. Because if ultimately when they do cut a deal and those prices go up, consumers pay it.
And it's dangerous. I mean, we have extreme weather events in my district, and if people can't get the information. So I think we can agree that it's a lose-lose-lose with the blackout. They're bad for local broadcasters, bad for cable providers, but mostly they hurt consumers who lose access to local news station and the programming they rely upon. Mr. Leggett, as you know, local broadcasting stations provide trusted reporting for communities around the country, including in my district. But the current marketplace has put their future in jeopardy as costs are on the rise and consumers have moved to non-traditional video platforms. I'll have to say, including in our household, in terms of following every last game of the U.S. Open. How do we ensure that local broadcasting can continue to operate now and into the future?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. Local broadcasting relies on two revenue streams: advertising, and that market has been completely overrun with the market power of Google and Facebook and the digital platforms, and retransmission consent, which allows local stations to reinvest in local news, local programming. Some criticisms have been raised today on the current system that has governed broadcasters' relationship between with the cable and satellite companies for the last 30 years, but it has unquestionably resulted in a system where in 210 unique markets around the country, individual local broadcast stations can invest in local news, local programming, and aren't just running national feeds. And it's a real testament to our legal regime that we have something no other country has in that regard. With regard to, so as we look at streaming and audiences cutting the cord and moving to some of these cable replacement services online, I think it's imperative that the expert agency, the FCC, looks at the impact that that's going to have on localism and whether there are elements of the regime that governs cable and satellite that ought to be considered or something new. I think we've all concluded here this is complicated. I do want to also say with regard to the retransmission consent impasse that you raised with WMUR, we understand how important that station is to your local constituents. The station is still freely available over the air, and it will continue to be. But it is important to hone in a little bit here that we talk about these impasses as an industry-wide problem. Over the last 5 years, 2 companies, one of which is relevant here, Dish and DirecTV, have been responsible for nearly 90% of the impasses nationwide in retransmission consent negotiations. So let's call this what it is, which is a problem with 2 companies.
So I should probably add, and certainly for the benefit of my Republican colleagues, this is for our country as well with the First in the Nation primary, but my time is up and I'll yield back.